Donald Trump is targeting BRICS. He's warned that any country supporting the BRICS bloc's anti-US policies will face an additional 10% tariff. On July 6, the two-day 17th BRICS Leaders Summit officially opened in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. On the opening day, a joint statement was released, implicitly criticizing the United States for completely violating WTO principles, disrupting global supply chains, and bringing uncertainty to global trade and economic development. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov also revealed to the media that BRICS countries are working on developing independent settlement and storage infrastructure, as well as a cross-border payment initiative. He noted, "We have been developing cross-border payment initiatives, independent settlement and deposit infrastructure, and projects to build insurance capacity and improve the efficiency of special economic zones." Lavrov added that the mechanism of the contingent reserve arrangement, which includes the use of currencies other than the US dollar, is currently being refined. He stated that the international community is increasingly focused on establishing development mechanisms independent of the West. The global South and East are becoming the main drivers of global economic growth. According to Lavrov, the BRICS organization has now fully revealed its hand. The international payment system we have traditionally used was established by the US-dominated IMF, which made the US dollar the world's most circulated currency and the most important currency in the international currency basket. However, the US has continuously exploited this dollar hegemony to extract wealth from the world. As the global reserve currency, the dollar accounts for 60% of global foreign exchange reserves, and over 50% of international trade settlements use the dollar. The Federal Reserve has become an invisible global central bank, whose interest rate hikes and cuts can easily affect the entire world. In 1990, Japan, then the world's second-largest economy, was targeted by U.S. financial capital. The U.S. enticed Japan to sign the Plaza Accord, aiming to raise the value of the Japanese yen through dollar devaluation. However, after the Plaza Accord was signed, Japan's domestic economic bubble rapidly expanded, leading to the collapse of its real estate bubble. U.S. capital then seized the opportunity to acquire major assets like Mitsubishi Estate, leading to Japan's painful, lost 3 decades. In 1997, U.S. financial magnate George Soros, with his financial scythe, targeted the 4 Asian tigers and other economically prosperous countries and regions. They successively dumped stocks and bonds in Thailand, South Korea, Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, and the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region, causing countries like Thailand, South Korea, and Indonesia to be shorted, with their core assets falling under the control of U.S. capital. Hong Kong, with strong support from mainland China, weathered that storm. This was a deliberate suppression of Asian economies by U.S. financial capital and exacerbated the crisis of confidence in the dollar. Since then, China has been committed to establishing and implementing an independent cross-border settlement system. The proposal of the Belt and Road Initiative in 2013 allowed this idea and planned to spread widely. As of 2025, China has signed bilateral local currency swap agreements with the central banks or monetary authorities of 42 countries and regions. Furthermore, China has achieved renminbi settlement for trade with 27 countries. This has undoubtedly greatly safeguarded the security of China's financial assets. Now, with continued dollar interest rate hikes and unclear trade policies from the Trump administration, more and more countries are beginning to share China's idea. Among them, Russia is the most proactive. Russia's vast overseas assets have been frozen, confiscated, and even misappropriated, and Russia has been unable to trade with most countries in the world due to U.S. European encirclement. Therefore, promoting a cross-border payment system within the BRICS organization is a very important matter. India is no exception. Modi has always harbored ambitions of becoming a global power. If the rupee could enter a system that dominates international currency trade, Modi would naturally be overjoyed. However, Trump is not pleased. If the BRICS initiative truly succeeds, dollar hegemony will indeed falter, and the U.S. will no longer be able to reap benefits effortlessly. So, on July 6th, he posted on Truth Social, stating that any country aligning with BRICS's anti-American policies will be subject to an additional 10% tariff. This policy will have no exceptions. It seems Trump is genuinely anxious, realizing that BRICS poses a serious threat to the United States. This 10% tariff threat, however, only exposes America's bluster and desperation. He seems to have no other means, so he's once again brandishing the tariff stick, hoping to intimidate whoever he can. Moreover, his statement about a 10% tariff is vague and leaves much room for interpretation, giving him more operational flexibility. The additional 10% tariff could mean imposing duties on current BRICS members. Also, if some third world countries are friendly with BRICS and endorse criticism of the US, such as de-dollarization or strengthening the voice of southern countries, these could be considered anti-American policies, leading to increased tariffs for those nations. Why 10%? This was certainly a spur-of-the-moment decision. It shows that Trump is becoming increasingly arbitrary and willing to use tariffs as a means to advance his economic and foreign policies. It also indicates that this approach is increasingly detrimental to the international community. In contrast, Foreign Ministry spokesperson Mao Ning stated that the BRICS mechanism is an important platform for cooperation among emerging markets and developing countries, advocating openness, inclusiveness, cooperation, and win-win results. Not block confrontation, and not targeting any specific country. Regarding additional tariffs, China has repeatedly clarified its position. Trade wars and tariff wars have no winners. Protectionism has no future. Facing Trump's threats, BRICS countries have chosen to push back directly, mainly because they are banking on two key points. First, Trump's threat is likely just bluster. The situation of the 10 BRICS member countries is complex. It includes countries like China and Russia, which are not intimidated by US pressure and dare to retaliate symmetrically, as well as countries like Saudi Arabia and the WEI, which have closer ties with the US. India, which is currently negotiating tariff issues with the US, has an even more complex situation. It's difficult for Trump to apply a blanket tariff to all BRICS nations. His claim of no exceptions is likely empty talk. Moreover, BRICS countries have never formed alliances with any country or organization. Beyond this, BRICS countries also have the confidence to challenge the US to the end. Russian President Putin pointed out in his speech that BRICS member states account for 1/3 of the Earth's landmass, nearly half of the world's population, and 40% of the global economy. Their combined GDP significantly exceeds that of other groups, including the G7. Such vast numbers cannot but give Trump pause. After all, this means that any policy aimed at containing all BRICS members will face immense resistance, especially given that the US itself has significant trade relations with BRICS member countries. Ultimately, since taking office, Trump has vigorously pursued his America First strategy, openly expressing his desire for the Panama Canal and Greenland, disregarding the sovereignty of other nations. He then brazenly launched tariff wars against dozens of countries. This series of retrograde policies could not fail to provoke opposition from other countries. The relevant statements concerning the US at this BRICS Leaders Summit are a direct manifestation of this opposition. Trying to silence public opinion through threats and intimidation is like trying to stop a flood with a dam. Trump genuinely underestimates the resilience and sense of responsibility of BRICS member states. Interestingly, India did not drag its feet at this BRICS meeting, which is quite surprising. After all, they are usually known for being troublemakers. From the United Nations down to regional organizations, whenever India participates, there are always various complications. Draft resolutions, cooperation plans, and even joint statements proposed by other countries, if they don't align with India's views or maximize their interests, will be opposed. If their self-serving proposals are not adopted, they will cause a major fuss in the relevant organizations. For example, not long ago, at the SCO meeting in China, The Indian representative refused to sign the joint statement because it did not criticize Pakistan by name as they demanded. Not to mention that if a joint statement also involves the US and the West, India would be even less likely to agree to sign it. So, India's performance at this BRICS summit is surprising. However, it's not surprising if we look at India's current predicament. Trump has already stated that other countries had better quickly reach agreements with China, or face maximum tariffs starting August 1st. This list of countries includes India. Since Trump announced reciprocal tariff measures, India has been actively engaging with the US, but America's appetite is too large, and India's concessions have not been enough to get Trump's approval. Modi is under considerable political pressure domestically. Even if he himself is willing to compromise, his domestic opponents would not let him get away with it. So, he has no choice but to be tough. This time, at the BRICS summit, Modi not only did not passively respond, but also personally traveled to Brazil to participate. It's clear that Modi has truly been hurt by the US. The aggressive Trump has left Modi with no room to retreat, forcing him to embrace the BRICS bloc. In conclusion, it is hoped that after experiencing failures, Trump will gain a better understanding of the current international situation and stop bringing his dictatorial style to interstate exchanges. BRICS countries will not tolerate such behavior. Trade negotiations between China and the EU have broken down. Within a week, China twice announced high additional tariffs on some EU goods. This is clearly a reminder to Europeans to weigh their options carefully and not misjudge the situation again. On July 1st, China's Ministry of Commerce announced the continuation of anti-dumping duties on imported stainless steel billets and hot-rolled coils originating from the EU, UK, South Korea, and Indonesia for a period of 5 years. The meaning of this is clear. These countries should not try to exploit loopholes. What happened in the past 5 years will happen again in the next 5 years. This also means that for the next 5 years, the path for steel companies from these countries to seize the Chinese market through low-priced products is completely blocked. Rewind to 2019, when China first wielded the anti-dumping stick against stainless steel products from these regions. This was in response to the difficult situation of the domestic industry. At that time, large quantities of EU stainless steel billets flooded into China at prices below cost, severely impacting domestic steel mills and directly snatching away local orders. According to investigations by China's Ministry of Commerce, during that period, the market share of imported EU stainless steel in China surged from 12% to 23%. This was not normal market competition. The Ministry of Commerce clearly found that these gains were achieved through low price dumping, using methods far below reasonable prices to grab market share. Now, 5 years later, the review results show that if the duties are cancelled, this price for volume dumping behavior is very likely to return. If anti-dumping measures are terminated now, those low-priced imported products that once impacted the Chinese market could again flood the domestic market in large quantities, putting the hard-recovered stainless steel industry back into crisis. For example, in terms of stainless steel components for new energy vehicles, products manufactured by domestic enterprises have reached internationally advanced levels in corrosion resistance and strength, and have even received many orders from foreign car companies. Thus, China's extension of anti-dumping duties undoubtedly builds a solid protective wall for its domestic stainless steel industry. Frankly, China is not targeting anyone without reason, but if the other party breaks the rules first, China will act according to the rules to protect its own industries from being bullied. Moreover, the EU constantly talks about valuing fair competition, but if it truly wants fairness, it should first consider its own double standards. It is worth noting that the Chinese market is not dispensable for the EU's stainless steel products. In terms of exports alone, China is their third largest customer. If EU stainless steel companies want to sell their goods, the Chinese market accounts for a significant share. If this trade relationship is damaged, their own lives will likely not be easy. After all, a large market that can consistently move high volumes is not easily replaced. On July 5th, China's Ministry of Commerce issued a major announcement, imposing anti-dumping duties on related brandy imported from the EU. This measure officially took effect on July 5. This is reportedly China's latest punitive tariff policy against the EU in response to escalating tensions in EU-China trade relations. Clearly, this is because the EU-China trade negotiations have not yielded the desired results. During Foreign Minister Wang Yi's visit to Europe, EU Foreign Policy Chief Kallas openly demanded that China end export restrictions on rare earth products and simultaneously accused China of providing support to Russia, posing a serious threat to European security, demanding that China stop material support to Russia. Obviously, this baseless accusation will greatly affect the atmosphere of dialogue between China and the EU. This may also be the main reason why China is considering shortening the upcoming EU-China summit to just one day. With the current attitude of Europeans, dialogue between the two sides will undoubtedly be difficult. However, the Chinese are reasonable. In the latest punitive tariff policy, they have left some room for Europeans. China agreed to exempt major cognac producers such as Pernod Ricard, LVMH, and Rémy Cointreau from high tariffs. The LVMH group stated that China promised that its Hennessy and Rémy Martin brandy brands could be exempt from tariffs as long as they are sold at a minimum price. Another company also stated that the agreement significantly reduced China's punitive measures, which helps European brandy companies strengthen investment in China. This also signals to the EU that the door to cooperation remains open, and business can still be done, but it must be done according to the rules. Any action that harms Chinese industrial interests will inevitably come at a corresponding cost. It is important to remember that in recent years, the EU has frequently imposed restrictive measures on China in the trade sector. China's move here is primarily in response to the EU's electric vehicle tariff policy. The EU's imposition of provisional anti-subsidy duties on Chinese electric vehicles has caused a considerable impact on relevant Chinese industries. Meanwhile, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi met with French President Emmanuel Macron. Macron's posture during the meeting showed a subtle shift compared to previous interactions. He first asked Wang Yi to convey his sincere greetings to China, emphasizing the broad consensus between China and France on major issues such as advocating multilateralism and upholding international law. He also mentioned that at a time of increasing global instability, as permanent members of the UN Security Council, both countries should assume greater responsibility, strengthen coordination in areas such as international economic and financial governance, and jointly resist hegemony, conflict, and bloc confrontation. When the conversation shifted to economic and trade areas, Macron expressed his thoughts, wanting China to increase investment in France, hoping to build a more balanced economic and trade relationship. He also specifically stated his expectation to visit China again at an appropriate opportunity. Against the backdrop of China's anti-dumping measures on brands, Macron's attitude towards China has become more pragmatic. From emphasizing consensus to strengthening cooperation, and then proactively mentioning plans to visit China, all these signals are positive to China. It is well known that the Chinese market has long been the most important overseas market for French brandy. If the Chinese market is lost, the entire industrial chain of the French brandy industry could suffer a heavy blow. It is worth mentioning that there have been earlier reports that Macron planned to visit China with Scholz, with one of the core objectives being to promote a massive order for Airbus from China, potentially involving 500 aircraft. If this order can be achieved, it would undoubtedly be a strong boost for Airbus and the French economy, greatly promoting the development of related industries and creating numerous job opportunities. Facing Macron's friendly signals, Foreign Minister Wang Yi also responded positively. China is willing to deepen mutually beneficial cooperation with France, but also clearly put forward requirements, hoping that France will provide a better and fairer environment for Chinese enterprises to invest and start businesses in France. This requirement hits the nail on the head. Currently, some Chinese enterprises investing in France face various invisible barriers and unfair treatment, such as cumbersome approval procedures and discriminatory policy clauses. Of course, the direction of China-France relations is never limited to bilateral interactions. The EU often wavers in its trade policies, periodically introducing policies detrimental to China economic and trade cooperation, while France often criticizes China diplomatically. As a core major power in the EU, France has key influence. Macron's expression of an active cooperative attitude this time, and his desire to personally visit China to promote bilateral relations, is a good start. However, it remains to be seen whether France can genuinely fulfill its commitments in practical actions and promote the EU to improve its trade policy towards China, thereby creating favorable conditions for the further development of China-France and China-EU relations. If France can play a positive role, China-France cooperation is expected to achieve breakthroughs in more areas, contributing more to global development and stability. Conversely, China-France relations may still face some twists and turns. Interestingly, the new round of global trade wars triggered by Trump's ascendancy has made China-EU trade relations more complex. The director of the Center for Strategic and International Studies, Bergman, previously predicted that while Trump launched trade wars, the EU and China are unlikely to unite against the US. The reason given was that both China and the EU are export-driven economies with limited potential for coordinated economic development, and facts have indeed shown that China and the EU are currently facing huge divergences on the issue of where their interests lie. EU-China relations face new challenges. Some media comment that simply attributing the current contradictions between China and the EU to Europe acting as a US lapdog is misleading. In the economic sphere, the core of the current dispute between Europe and China stems from Europe's concerns about China's excess capacity impacting Europe, while Europe's trade barriers have harmed the original trade trust between China and the EU. Therefore, even though both China and the EU are impacted by Trump's trade war policies, the conflict of interest between China and the EU remains higher than their common interests, ultimately leading to ongoing disputes on trade policy. However, European industrial policy expert Folkman believes that the trade dispute between China and the EU still has a chance to ease. Both sides can still expand dialogue through the EU-China summit, enhance mutual trust, and jointly reduce punitive tariffs, ultimately establishing regulatory mechanisms to ensure smooth and stable bilateral trade. But it needs to be vigilant that the EU remains an ally of Trump in the security field, and the competitive relationship between the US and China in the security field may become the biggest stumbling block for EU-China trade.